All right. Hello, everybody. Today I want to talk a little bit about this kind of silly tweet from everybody's friend, Conceptual James Lindsay, the math major. So I want to look at this tweet. I want to talk about it for a minute. And, it's funny with James Lindsay because he's wildly committed to not knowing anything about anything. And every time he comes up against someone who actually does know something about anything, he's exposed as just having a big empty pumpkin for a brain. But you never really know with these guys. You never really know how much of it is an act because it gets them attention, and how much of it is really just sheer ignorance. Who knows? It's not really worth thinking about. We can just take it at face value and judge it for what it is. But with James, it's to such a degree it's laughable how little he knows about the subject matter he has professed to be a world expert on, and that's why he rarely talks about it to anyone who's actual authority on anything. Because he looks like a fool, and that's pretty simple to explain. He's a fool. So with this tweet about Marcuse, and I know I pronounce it Marcuse, and whatever, it doesn't really matter about what it says, and you don't have to read it. We don't have to go into an interpretation of what Marcuse meant or might have meant. It doesn't matter to this discussion at all. It doesn't even matter who Marcuse was. You don't even really need to care about that. Now, why do I say that? It's not a disrespect to Marcuse. He's certainly a great theorist, even though myself as a critical theorist, I don't read Marcuse that much, and I've cited him once, but that's it's just because it's different things for different people, right? He's a great theorist, but I think by looking at James's argument here, we can illustrate that all these right-wing media figures kind of masquerading as intellectuals miss out on something fundamental, especially fundamental about sociology, something that I try to hammer home to my freshman sociology students. And that is that sociological theory is not a dogma. It's not a religion. You're not a follower of a social theorist. That's not how any of it works, to quote the meme. It's not it at all. So you'll notice that a lot of right-wing media figures treat academics or the production of knowledge in general as a conspiracy theory. This was widely popularized by Glenn Beck and his whiteboards and his twine and his photos, but it goes back much further. This was common for the John Birch Society, McCarthyism, the Red Scare, House Un-American Activities Committee. Do you believe this person? Have you said their name? Then you must believe this. So here, Conceptual James wants you to make this kind of equation, that critical race theory is a critical theory. Marcuse is a critical theorist. Therefore, anything that Marcuse wrote or said is not only a tenet of critical race theory, but also a deeply held belief for critical race theorists, right? That's what they kind of think here, is that you're supposed to accept this equation, that's how it works, that once you are a theorist of something, you take in all of these beliefs and you just act instrumentally on them. So the next question to ask then, and a good question, I hope you thought of it, if that view of sociological theory is not how it works, then how does it work? Well, congratulations, you're a step further than Conceptual James will ever get, because if he got that far, he'd lose his career. And if you thought to ask that question, you're ahead of him, right? But it's worth pointing out they don't actually care about the next question, because worrying about things like this would mean that they would lose their gigs and people wouldn't pay attention to them. And James would be just another guy in Knox County in the adjunct pool over at Pellissippi. And, solidarity to all our brothers and sisters in the adjunct pool of Pellissippi. That's a nobler pursuit than what James does. So how does this work then? How am I saying that he got it wrong? How does it actually work? Well, let me give you an example. Me. Hey, look, it's me. I'm a critical urban theorist. I work a lot using Marxist theory. First, does this mean that I'm somehow not allowed to think, work, or write in some other theory or framework or lens? Of course not. Why would it? All it means is that I have chosen to specialize in one particular theoretical tradition. But let's say I'm working on a research project with a group of people, which is pretty common. Hopefully, it's what we all do. Do I have to say, start doing Marxism or I'm out? No, that's dumb and counterproductive and doesn't really accomplish anything. Can I bring a working knowledge of Marxism? Maybe, hopefully, or at least some little part of it that I know about, right? Maybe, ideally. But there seems to be a view, or in any case a strategy, where people like James think that academics use theorists like adherents to a religion use religious figures. But there's nothing holy about a theorist, and there's nothing sacred about their theory, even Marxism. Sorry. In fact, the practice of sociology is quite the opposite. Instead of preaching a gospel, you're trying to poke holes in it or patch up cracks in it, or in some other cases tear it down and build something else, right? One of my favorite sociologists, Michael Buravoy, who was president of the American Sociological Association for a while, great sociologist and Marxist, describes the sociologist's job as to ransack theory. And I love that, putting it that way. That's what you're doing. You're trying to get in there and wreck it and tear it apart and poke a hole in the wall and run through it, right? You're not proselytizing for it, but you're setting out to look for gaps and the flaws and the contradictions and the shortcomings in theory. That's how you grow sociological theory. That's how you make a career for yourself, not by just preaching. The TV, often professors are portrayed on TV as kind of standing up in front and proselytizing and preaching, and that's not how it works. You're trying to figure out what doesn't work here. Where is the shortcoming? Where does this not take me? I want to go somewhere and the theory isn't taking me there. How do I work around this? How does this work? So misunderstanding this whole thing leads to one of the biggest and most nonsensical leaps that performers like James consistently make. Let's take the case of neo-Marxism. So James and others see this and see neo-Marxism and try to group everyone who is considered a neo-Marxist into some kind of resurgent Marxism, right? Rather, neo-Marxism is a much more complex reconsideration or reevaluation of Marxism. If Marxism or any other sociological theoretical tradition were actually unable to consider itself and grow and change, and even, God forbid, to deviate from the original theorist or theories, then it would be dead as a theoretical proposition and be useless for the rest of us who are trying to understand the world that we live in, right? Marx was writing during the Industrial Revolution, during the early stages of capitalism. He was incredibly perceptive and amazing at understanding that moment in history and extrapolating forward into the future about that. But we can't just leave it there, right? This is why trying to understand sociological theory, in particular Marxism in the case of a lot of these people, because they're tapping back into the Red Scare from the 50s and red baiting. In particular, Marxism and critical theories, which it must be noted overlap but are not synonyms for each other. Just because something's a critical theory does not mean it's Marxism. Just because it's Marxism does not mean it's critical theory. Not all Marxists are critical theorists. Not all critical theorists are Marxists, although there is, within Marxism, examining contradictions and conflicts and understanding power dynamics, which is important to critical theory, right? But it doesn't mean they're all the same thing. So understanding it in that way, like people like James do, as a religious gospel, it makes for an interesting performance. And that's what they're looking for. Performance for an audience of conspiracy theorists who are expecting you to sew them a good yarn. But it's not how sociological theory functions, right? It's not. It's not the base level of understanding that would be expected of someone coming into this horrible job market, right? You would not get a entry-level job in sociology thinking about things this way. And that's the point. James doesn't want an entry-level job. He wants to be a guy talking on TV that people see as an expert, while the whole time being so lazy to never bother to learn anything about these. So hopefully any first-year sociology students, hopefully ones that have been through my classes, understand that sociological theory is not dogma. You are not an evangelist for sociological theory. It's something that you work with. It's a tool that you work with, right? And this is a fundamental understanding that James and these conspiracy performers like him either don't understand or pretend to not understand so that they can make that money. All right, thanks. That was all for this time. See ya next time, I guess.